The first signs of war came without warning. Strange ships appeared in the skies above the frontier colony, their shapes unlike anything the humans had seen before. Villagers stopped in the streets, staring upward as massive shadows passed over them. The air shook with the hum of alien engines, and the sky darkened as the fleet grew larger. Within hours, panic had taken over the settlement. Joran was among the few who didn't run. A former soldier turned farmer, he stood in the middle of the dirt road, watching the enemy ships descend. His hands were empty, but his eyes were sharp. He knew that war was coming, and he would not leave his home undefended. Somewhere deep inside, he could already feel the old instincts waking up. The first wave hit hard. Buildings shattered under the impact of alien bombardments. Fires raged through the streets, and the air was thick with the smell of burning wood and metal. Joran ran toward the screams, his boots pounding the ground as dust and debris rained down around him. He did not care about the danger. He cared only about getting people to safety. That was when he saw her. Standing in the smoke, framed by the glow of flames, was a tall, striking figure in silver and black armor. Her long hair glinted blue in the light, and her emerald eyes locked onto his. She held a massive blade in her hands, its edge shimmering with alien craftsmanship. Her pointed ears marked her as something not of this world. She didn't attack him. Instead, she raised the blade and took a step forward, her boots crunching over broken stone. The chaos of the battlefield seemed to fade for a moment, as if the noise itself was holding its breath. Joran's grip tightened on the old combat knife at his belt. He had no idea what this alien warrior wanted, but he was ready for a fight. Her voice cut through the smoke, calm yet commanding. She spoke in a language he did not know, but the tone was clear. She was challenging him. Joran stayed silent, watching her movements. She was skilled, that much was obvious. The way she balanced the blade, the way her eyes never left him, she was a fighter who had faced death many times before. Then, to his surprise, she shifted her stance. Instead of striking, she angled the sword downward slightly. Her gaze softened, though the fire in her eyes never faded. She took another step. Closer, her lips forming words in broken human speech. "Teach me," she said, her voice rough but determined. The request struck him harder than any weapon could. Around them, the battle still raged. Shouts, explosions, and the roar of engines filled the air once more. But in that single moment, Joran understood that this alien warrior was not here to kill him. She was here for something else entirely. And whatever it was, it had just changed the course of the war. Joran did not answer her right away. His mind was still racing from the chaos around them. Smoke rolled across the ground, hiding. Movement in the shadows. Somewhere nearby, the crack of alien weapons split the air. Yet she stood there, unmoving, her sword steady in her grip. Her eyes never left his face, as if his reaction was more important than the battle itself. The way she said those two words was strange. "Teach me" was not the plea of someone desperate to survive. It was the demand of a warrior seeking something greater. Joran had heard similar tones in the voices of young recruits who wanted to prove themselves. But this was different. This was not about proving herself to others. This was about something deep inside her own soul. He stepped forward cautiously. His boots crushed glass beneath him, and he noticed she did not flinch. She was unafraid, but not arrogant. The way she shifted her weight told him she was prepared for an attack at any second. Her posture was balanced, yet her sword did not point at his heart anymore. It hung lower now, as if she was lowering her guard for him. Joran spoke at last. His voice low and firm. "Why me?" The question made her blink, as though it had not occurred to her that she might need to explain. Her lips parted, and in halting human speech she replied, "You fight different. You fight to protect." The words were broken, but the meaning was clear. She had seen something in him that she could not find among her own kind, Another explosion shook the ground. Dust fell from the upper walls of the burning structures around them. Screams echoed from the distance, but still she did not look away. She took another step toward him. The light from the fires reflected in her emerald eyes, making them almost glow. There was no fear there, only determination and a strange kind of respect. Joran's instincts told him to refuse. He did not trust her, and he knew nothing about her people or her reasons. But another part of him, the part that had trained soldiers in his younger years, recognized the look she was giving him. It was the look of someone willing to follow a path no one else would dare take, and for reasons he could not explain. He found himself nodding. Her shoulders relaxed slightly when he did. She sheathed her sword in a single smooth motion, the metal singing as it slid into place. She glanced toward the sky, where alien ships still moved in formation above the burning town. Whatever her mission had been, it was clear she had chosen to risk it for this. When she looked back at him, her voice was quiet but firm. "Then show me," she said. For a moment, they stood in silence. Two warriors from different worlds, surrounded by the chaos of war, yet locked in an unspoken agreement. Somewhere beyond the smoke, the sound of advancing enemy soldiers grew louder. Joran adjusted his grip on his knife and turned toward the sound. "First lesson," he said, without looking back at her. "We moved together." They moved through the ruins, side by side. Joran kept his eyes scanning every shadow, listening for the faintest sound of movement. The alien warrior moved differently from him. Her steps were silent, her body shifting like water on broken walls and debris. She was fast, but she always stayed just within his reach, matching his pace. Without being told, the streets were a maze of collapsed buildings and fire-lit alleys. Smoke made the air heavy, and every breath tasted of ash. Somewhere far above, the enemy ships still hovered, their dark shapes barely visible through the haze. Joran led her toward the outskirts of the settlement, where the fighting was thinner. He needed space to teach her, but he also needed to understand her first. She broke the silence with a question. "Why do humans fight to protect?" Her voice was quiet but carried weight, as if she had been thinking about it for a long time. Joran glanced at her and saw no mockery in her eyes. She genuinely wanted to know. "Because if we don't, we lose everything that matters," he said simply. She tilted her head slightly, considering his words. They stopped near a half-collapsed wall. The flames from a nearby building lit their faces in orange and gold. Joran crouched low, gesturing for her to do the same. She followed instantly, her armor glinting in the firelight. "Lesson 1, he said, "is knowing when not to fight." She frowned at that, as though it went against everything she had been taught. But she stayed silent, waiting. Movement stirred in the shadows ahead. A squad of alien soldiers passed by, their weapons ready, their boots crunching over shattered glass. Joran held up a hand, and the warrior froze. She didn't even breathe. Loudly, the soldiers moved on without seeing them. Only when they were gone did Joran lower his hand. "Patience can win more battles than a blade," he said. She gave a short nod, but her eyes still carried doubt. He could see that restraint was not her natural way. She had the instincts of a predator, trained to strike first and think later. But if she wanted to learn from him, she would have to change. "Next lesson," he said, "is awareness." He pointed toward the street. "Every sound, every shadow, every scent, know them before they know you." They moved again, and this time he watched her. She was trying, he could see that. Her eyes flicked toward movement, her head turned at small noises. She adjusted her steps when the ground shifted under her boots. It was rough, but it was progress. Joran felt a strange satisfaction at seeing her adapt so quickly. Maybe she really could learn his way. A sudden scream cut through the air. It was sharp, desperate, and close. Without thinking, Joran sprinted toward it. She followed instantly, her sword drawn again. They turned a corner and saw a human child trapped beneath fallen beams, an alien soldier advancing toward him. Joran's knife was in his hand before he even thought about it. The warrior didn't wait for an order. She moved. What happened next was swift and brutal. She closed the distance in 3 steps, her sword flashing in the firelight. The alien soldier fell before he even raised his weapon. She knelt beside the child, her strong arms lifting the beams with ease. Joran pulled the boy free and checked him quickly. He was scared but unharmed. The warrior met Joran's eyes, and for the first time she smiled. The child clung to Joran's arm, eyes wide with fear. His small hands trembled as he tried to speak, but no words came out. Joran crouched and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, giving him a steady look. "You're safe now," he said. Softly, the warrior stood nearby, her sword still in hand, scanning the shadows for more threats. Her stance told him she wasn't convinced the danger was over. When the boy finally managed to speak, his voice was barely a whisper. He told them his family had been taken toward the central square by the alien soldiers. Joran's jaw tightened. The square was likely heavily guarded, and the enemy wouldn't hesitate to use hostages. He looked at the warrior, who met his gaze without hesitation. "We go," she said simply. It wasn't a question, and he didn't argue. They moved quickly, keeping to the edges of the ruined streets. The warrior carried the child on her back, her balance steady despite the extra weight. Joran led the way, marking every sound in shadow. As they passed, fires burned low in some areas, leaving behind only smoke and the smell of scorched metal. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the enemy's control. At the edge of the square, they stopped. Joran peered around the corner of a shattered building, counting the guards. There were more than he hoped for. Heavy weapons glinted in the firelight, and patrols moved in tight patterns. He could see groups of civilians huddled together in the center, fear etched on every face. Among them might be the boy's family, but rushing in would be suicide. The warrior knelt beside him, setting the child down carefully. "We fight?" she asked, her voice steady. Joran shook his head. "Not yet, we need a plan." She frowned but didn't press the issue. Her eyes followed the guards' movements with sharp precision. He could tell she was mapping their patterns, already thinking like he did. That was a good sign, but patience was still her hardest lesson. Joran studied the environment. The square had multiple entry points, but most were blocked or watched. A collapsed market stall on the far side offered partial cover. If they could reach it unseen, they might get close enough to strike fast and free the captives. He pointed it out to her, and she nodded once. No questions, no wasted words. Just readiness. They began their approach, moving low and using the ruins for cover. The warrior was silent as a shadow, her steps precise. Joran kept glancing at her, noting how quickly she adapted to his methods. She was learning to wait, to watch, and to strike only when the moment was right. That shift in her style gave him hope that she could truly understand his way. A guard passed dangerously close to their position. Joran pressed himself against the wall, feeling the warrior do the same behind him. The soldier paused, scanning the area, but moved on after a moment. Joran released the breath he had been holding. He caught her eyes, and she gave a faint smile. A silent acknowledgement that she understood the value of restraint. Finally, they reached the collapsed stall. From here, they could see the hostages clearly. The boy's face lit up when he spotted 2 figures among them, likely his parents. Joran's grip tightened on his knife. The warrior's hand rested on her sword hilt, but she did not move until he gave the signal. That, more than anything, told him she was starting to trust his judgment. Joran's eyes swept over the guards once more, tracking their movement patterns. Every step, every pause, every glance was locked into his memory. He could see the gaps, the seconds when the enemy's focus shifted away from the hostages. Those moments would be their only chance to strike without endangering the civilians. The warrior waited beside him, her breathing steady, her focus unbroken. He turned to her and gestured toward the boy. "Stay with him," he whispered. Her brow furrowed as if ready to argue, but she nodded after a moment. Joran slipped away into the shadows, moving along the edges of the square. The guards had no idea he was there. Years of training kept his steps quiet and his presence hidden. He was a shadow among fire-lit ruins. Reaching the far side, Joran positioned himself behind a broken cart. From there, he had a clear view of two guards standing near the largest group of hostages. They were relaxed, talking to each other, their weapons resting loosely in their hands. Joran knew that would change the instant an alarm was raised. He had to be fast and precise if the plan was to work. With a quick signal, he caught the warrior's attention. Even from a distance, she understood. She shifted her stance, ready to move when he gave the final order. Joran's grip tightened on his knife. His muscles tensed, his breathing slowed, and time seemed to narrow into the space between heartbeats. Then, without hesitation, he moved. The first guard never saw him coming. A swift strike to the throat dropped him silently. The second guard turned too late. Joran's blade caught him across the neck, and the man fell without a sound. In seconds, both were down. The hostages froze, their eyes wide with fear and hope. Joran gestured for silence, his other hand pointing toward the warrior. She moved. Like lightning, crossing the open ground with her sword flashing in the firelight. 3 more guards fell before they could react. The hostages began to stir, realizing rescue was at hand. The boy ran from cover toward his parents, and the reunion was brief but fierce. Joran's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay together, follow us," he ordered firmly. The remaining guards shouted and raised their weapons. Blaster fire lit the square with deadly flashes. Joran dove behind a stone barrier, pulling a hostage down with him to keep them safe. The warrior deflected a bolt with her blade, the energy sparking against the alien metal. She leapt forward, cutting down another enemy in a single, precise motion. Joran returned fire with a captured weapon, forcing the last few guards to retreat toward the edges of the square. He didn't waste the opportunity. "Move now," he called to the civilians. The warrior took point, guiding them toward a narrow alley that led away from the main fight. Her movements were sharp and controlled, every step placed to protect those behind her. They reached the alley, the noise of the battle fading slightly. The boy's parents clutched him tightly, refusing to let go. Joran stayed at the rear, ensuring no one was left behind. The warrior met his gaze as they emerged into a quieter street. Her eyes carried something new: respect, not just for his skill, but for the reason he fought. It was the lesson she had come for. They moved deeper into the quieter streets, their footsteps quick but measured. The rescued civilians kept close together, their eyes darting at every sound. Joran stayed at the rear, checking behind them for signs of pursuit. The warrior led the group with confidence, scanning every corner before signaling it was clear. Her sword never left her hand, the blade glinting under the dim glow of burning rooftops. They reached an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the settlement. The large double doors creaked as they pushed them open, and the group slipped inside. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of old wood mixed with the lingering smoke from outside. Joran signaled for everyone to stay quiet and stay low. The warrior closed the doors and leaned her sword against the wall beside her. The boy's parents thanked Joran first, their voices full of gratitude. Then they turned to the warrior, bowing slightly in their own way. She seemed almost surprised by the gesture, as if she had never been thanked before. Her eyes softened for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a serious look. "Safe here?" she asked, glancing toward Joran. He gave a short nod. Joran knelt beside a wooden crate and began checking the captured weapon he carried. It was not a human design, but its controls were simple enough to understand. "We can't stay long," he said without looking up. "Once they realize the hostages are gone, they'll search every building." The warrior moved closer, her gaze fixed on him. "Then we fight again," she said with certainty. He looked up at her, studying her expression. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. "Fighting isn't always the answer," he reminded her. She tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "But sometimes it is," she replied. Joran gave a faint smile, knowing she was not entirely wrong. "We'll fight if we have to," he said, "but we protect them first." The civilians huddled together near the center of the warehouse, speaking in hushed tones. The boy sat close to his parents, his eyes still wide but calmer now. The warrior glanced at him and then back at Joran. "This is why," she said quietly. "Why I want to learn." Joran nodded once. He didn't need her to explain further. He understood exactly what she meant. A faint sound outside made both of them freeze. Joran raised a hand for silence, and the civilians obeyed. The warrior retrieved her sword and moved to the side of the doorway. Joran crept to a small gap in the wall, peering outside. Dark shapes moved in the street, enemy scouts, searching. They were moving methodically, checking every building in their path. "They're coming," Joran whispered. The warrior's grip on her sword tightened, but she waited for his signal. He scanned the area and found a narrow back exit that led toward the outer hills. "We move now," he said, motioning for the civilians to follow. The group gathered quickly, and the warrior took the lead again, guiding them toward the back of the warehouse. They slipped into the night, the sounds of the scouts fading behind them. The cool air of the hills was a sharp contrast to the heat of the burning settlement. The stars above seemed brighter here, untouched by the smoke. For the first time since the battle began, Joran allowed himself to breathe a little easier. The warrior walked beside him, her eyes still alert but carrying a quiet pride. The group made their way up the rocky slopes, the faint moonlight guiding their steps. The ground was uneven, forcing the civilians to move carefully. Joran stayed at the back to watch for any sign of pursuit. The warrior led from the front, her sword in one hand and her other hand free to steady anyone who stumbled. Her movements were sure and confident, even on the treacherous path. The higher they climbed, the more the burning settlement faded into the distance. From here, they could see the faint glow of fires against the night sky. The smoke rose like dark pillars, a reminder of what they had escaped. But Joran knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The enemy would not give up so easily. He could feel the urgency pressing in on them. They reached a narrow ridge that overlooked a valley below. The warriors stopped in motion for everyone to crouch low. From their position, they could see more enemy patrols moving through the hills. The soldiers carried searchlights, sweeping the beams across the rocky terrain. Joran studied their pattern and realized they were closing in faster than expected. "We can't go down there," he said quietly. The warrior looked at the civilians, then back at the ridge. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the opposite side of the valley. "There," she said, pointing to a cluster of dark shapes. It was an old watchtower and a few crumbling walls, likely abandoned for years. "We hide there," she added firmly. Joran nodded in agreement. Moving along the ridge, they kept low to avoid the searchlights. The terrain worked in their favor, with large boulders providing natural cover. The warrior's pace was steady, but her eyes never stopped scanning for threats. Joran could see how far she had come since they first met. She no longer rushed into danger blindly. She moved with purpose, guided by a new kind of discipline. They reached the ruins without being spotted. The watchtower was little more than a skeleton of stone and wood, but it offered shelter from the wind and a clear view of the valley. The civilians gathered in the shadow of the walls, grateful for the brief safety. Joran stood near the edge, watching the patrols continue their sweep. The warrior joined him, her voice low. "We wait, yes?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "Until they pass." She nodded and rested her sword against her shoulder. For a moment, they stood in silence, their eyes on the moving lights below. Then she spoke again, her words thoughtful. "I see now. Fighting is not only the blade, it is the mind." Joran glanced at her and saw the truth in her expression. She was learning faster than he had expected. Hours seemed to pass before the patrols finally moved farther away. The valley grew still again, leaving only the sound of the wind over the rocks. Joran signaled for the civilians to rest while they had the chance. The warrior took the first watch without being asked. She stood at the edge of the ruins, her silhouette sharp against the pale light of the moon. Joran sat nearby, his back against the cold stone. For the first time since the invasion began, he felt a sliver of hope. The warrior's presence had changed the course of this escape, and her willingness to learn had kept them alive. As he closed his eyes for a moment, he knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together as more than just allies. The first light of dawn touched the ridge, painting the rocks in shades of gold and crimson. The civilians stirred from their uneasy rest, their faces drawn but alive. Joran was already awake, checking the valley below for movement. The warrior stood beside him, her sword at her side, her gaze steady. The air was crisp, and for a moment the war felt far away, but the sound of engines shattered the calm. Small enemy scout craft swept across the horizon, heading toward the hills. Joran's jaw tightened. They would have to move again, and quickly. The warrior turned to him, waiting for his call. "We go to the mountains," he said. She nodded without hesitation. The civilians gathered what little they had and prepared to follow. They descended the far side of the ridge, moving swiftly through the uneven ground. The sun climbed higher, and with it came the heat. Joran kept scanning the skies, wary of the scout ship's return. The warrior moved at the front, guiding them through narrow passes and dry streambeds that offered cover. Every step took them farther from the burning settlement and deeper into unknown territory. By midday, they reached the edge of a dense forest at the base of the mountains. The shade beneath the trees was a welcome relief from the sun. The warriors stopped, scanning. "The path ahead, safe?" she asked quietly. Joran studied the ground, listening for unnatural sounds. "Safe for now," he replied. The civilians moved into the shadows, their relief almost visible. They followed a winding trail through the forest, the sounds of leaves and distant birds replacing the noise of war. For the first time since their meeting, Joran saw the warriors' shoulders ease slightly. She glanced at the boy who now walked between his parents, smiling faintly at the sight. "This is why," she said simply. Joran didn't answer, but he understood her completely. By late afternoon, they found a small clearing beside a clear stream. The water was cool and fresh, and the civilians drank deeply. Joran filled a canteen and handed it to the warrior. She accepted it with a nod, taking a slow sip before passing it to the boy. Her movements were calm, almost gentle, a sharp contrast to the fierce warrior he had first met. They rested there for a while, but Joran's mind never stopped working. He knew the enemy would not abandon the search. They would come again stronger, and in greater numbers. He looked at the warrior, who was sharpening her blade with steady hands. "When they come," she said without looking up, "I will fight like you taught." Her voice carried both promise and certainty. As evening fell, they prepared a small fire in the shelter of the trees. The civilians huddled close, sharing quiet words. Joran sat across from the warrior, the flames casting light across her armor. "You've learned fast," he said. She met his eyes and replied, "I had the right teacher." There was no pride in her tone, only truth. For her, this was not the end but the beginning. The night was still when Joran finally allowed himself to rest. The warrior took the first watch, her silhouette steady against the flickering firelight. She kept her eyes on the dark forest, ready for whatever might come. She had pointed her blade at him once as a stranger, but now she guarded him as an ally. In the silence, Joran knew they would face the future as something more than survivors.